I'm going to be handing this over to him. And at the end of his presentation, you'll be able to type in questions in the chat, and I will read them out and we'll get them answered. We're also recording this via the library's YouTube channel, and once that link is available to me, I will be emailing it to the registrants of this meeting via the library market website. So based on that, go ahead and take it away.
Welcome everyone. My name is Samuel and I am joined by Carnell Brame and Sandra Bowie. Today our workshop is, we're gonna be talking about land use basics. So we are planning and urban design. Our mission is to advance livability, economic vibrancy, sustainability, and equity throughout Dallas. The services we provide are to develop and facilitate citywide neighborhood comprehensive plans and policies through effective community engagement. We facilitate neighborhood revitalization in targeted neighborhoods, and we strengthen neighborhood associations. So this is one of many of our capacity building workshops. We have 4 that we focus on primarily. So we have navigating city services, which we had last week, and that's where we learn how to resolve neighborhood challenges and how to report and track service requests provided to 311. We also learn how to create neighborhood organizations with 7 steps and how to operate successfully throughout and form a neighborhood workshop. Today's workshop is land use basics, and today you'll learn frequently used terms and increase awareness about the role of zoning and how development happens. Our next workshop, which we will talk about at the end and when that day is data is power. And there we will discuss why data is important and the various sources neighborhood leaders can access. An interactive demonstration of the map, My Neighborhood tool, will also be presented. So today's workshop overview, what we will be talking about today is land use concepts, zoning, land development process, and neighborhood involvement.
Cool. Thank you, Sam, for that introduction. Welcome, everybody. I'm Carnell again. I'm a service area planning manager with our planning and urban design department. I'm glad to be here with you all today, and I look forward to your questions. So the first part of our presentation will be land use concepts. So what is land use? Land use could be defined as how people use land for various types of social and economic activities. So different types of land uses can include residential, retail, industrial, or agricultural. In a city such as the size of Dallas, land use can be very complex. So as you think about land use in your own life, you think, do you live next to a business? How long does it take you to get to work or school every day? What routes do you take? What recreation or shopping options do you have nearby where you live or where you work? So are there parks near you? Are there movie theaters? Are there grocery stores? These are all examples of what land use looks like for you and for our city. So thinking about land use in Dallas, there are over 1.3 million residents and 1.2 million jobs in Dallas, which feels like a rather large number. Over 2 out of 3 Dallas jobs are filled by people who don't live in Dallas. And so that means that people are traveling into the city every day for jobs. And there's a lot of people that are traveling out of the city in different ways. Dallas has 360 square miles of land. And roads, highways, and other transportation take up over 17% of Dallas land. 29% of Dallas residents do not have a public park within a 10-minute walk. So again, this is different ways to think about how land use happens within Dallas. So what is land use planning and why is it important? We do land use planning. That's what planning and urban design does, to coordinate and regulate land use to promote a better quality of life for all of residents and all stakeholders within Dallas. So primarily cities and municipalities are responsible for land use planning. State law as well as counties also have a role. So state law authorizes cities to regulate land use to promote public benefits. So that kind of includes making sure that there are adequate services, that we have clean air and clean water, and that the city can be economically viable and vital. State law also protects private property rights. And so even as the city is planning for land use and for the greater good, there is also always a balance between private property rights. So why is land use planning important? Land is a limited resource. We're not gaining additional land. And so especially within Dallas, which is surrounded by other cities and municipalities. And so as we continue to develop, we have to think about how to develop in a sustainable way, in a way that sustains life. Land use impacts our quality of life in many ways. If we think about different safety, if we think about pollution, as we think about how we get from one place to the other, these all affect our quality of life and what attracts people to live here and what keeps people living here. Land use affects the cost of public services. So if we're thinking about our location of our libraries, even our rec centers, those things cost money, and they come from the tax base that our residents pay into. And so how we build those things will affect us long term. So these are reasons why we plan and why we do land use planning. So moving on to zoning. So zoning, as some of you may be aware, zoning is a type of regulation of land use. So it's a legal tool used by cities to regulate land use by grouping land into zones, each with its own rules. So if we're thinking about zoning, we think about what land uses are allowed within a particular zone. So where you live might be a residential district. And so it may allow a single family house with one household. It may allow two family households with two residents on the same lot. It may allow multifamily housing with 30 or more apartments. Also, some of us may live in commercial areas. We may live over restaurants or over a coffee shop. And so these are all different types of land uses that may be allowed. Zoning also regulates how tall the buildings are. So a lot of our residential districts, the tallest a building can be is 35 feet. If we go downtown, buildings are much taller. This is a part of what our standards in zoning are. If we're thinking about how close our neighbors are, how large each lot for each house is, that's a function of zoning. And then how many homes can be built. These are all different ways that zoning shows up within our life and within the built environment of our neighborhoods. So why is zoning important? Why do we have it? Is it just a pain in our side? Does it just is it just there to ruin the city? Really, zoning is there to create reasonable expectations, and that's really for the city, which is tasked with looking out with the greater good. That's for existing residents and property owners that are already within an area that have invested or have established themselves within the area, as well as for new construction and developers that may come in. So zoning really is creating a set of rules which we can all follow and plan for the future on. Zoning also provides an open public process for changes within those land use rules. And so this sign that's represented here, you may have seen around the city. It identifies a case number. and also a phone number to call. So if you see any of these signs and you want to find out more about what the zoning may be taking place, what changes may happen, this is where you find that information. And later on, we'll talk about how neighborhoods and how residents can make sure that their voice is heard within that process of rezoning. So there's two different types of zoning concepts that we want to bring up today. Euclidean zoning and form-based zoning, both of which exist within Dallas. So Euclidean zoning kind of has a funny name, but it focuses on separating land uses from each other to reduce negative impacts. And so as I had spoke about earlier, if we're thinking about residential versus industrial versus commercial. These are types of very simplified Euclidean zoning. Again, in the city as complex as Dallas, we have zoning that goes much more in depth, but overall, part of what that zoning is intended to do is to separate uses to reduce those impacts overall. So we have single family neighborhoods, we have commercial areas and mixed use areas such as kind of the central parts of the city. And we even have industrial areas that are in different areas of the city. In form-based zoning, it looks more at the form of the building, the shape of the building, how it interacts with the street and the things around it, while also encouraging a mix of appropriate land uses. So if you have more questions about form-based zoning or Euclidean zoning as we go through this presentation, we can help connect you to resources or to find out what type of zoning you have in your area. Next slide. So looking at the different types of zoning districts that we have within Dallas, we have standard zoning districts. So these are quote unquote ready-made zoning districts that are defined in the city development code that can be used off the shelf. We also have specific use permit zoning, which you may have seen signs for. And so this specific use permits or SUPs, they're require extra permission or extra approval by our council to be allowed within a certain area. And so someone that's required to have a SUP isn't allowed to just go out and build or just go out to get a permit. They actually have to meet some additional requirements before they're allowed to pull that permit. So that's the purpose of specific use permits. Plan development districts. These are custom design zoning districts for a specific site or group of sites. There's a lot of plan development districts or PDs. You may hear them referred to. You may be within a PD. And so these are slightly different from the standard zoning districts in that it's related to a plan or some type of layout or design for that part of the city. And then we also have special purpose districts, which are custom designed with special regulations, such as for signage or historic preservation. So it's very possible that you live or work within a PD or a special purpose district, which may have other regulations that follow along with those, but also are likely connected to some type of plan, which could help you advocate for the things that you see within your neighborhood. So types of zoning changes. There's three main types that we would like to highlight today. Those include code amendments. These are made by the city and apply to all land within a standard zoning district. And so an example of a code amendment could be changing parking regulations. So that's a specific piece within our zoning regulations that could be changed and that residents can have input on. site-specific zoning changes. And so this is more geographically based. And so if we're looking at a specific piece of land, changing it from one zoning district to another. And then we have our variances or special exceptions. So these are specific adjustments allowed within the zoning code or for a specific site that address specific features about that site or hardships. So a type of variance could include the number of parking spaces within a site, or the height of the fence. Could be variances that are small but specific adjustments. And so these are things to look out for. Likely, if you see a sign, it will be for a site-specific zoning change. And who makes zoning decisions? So actually, it's a number of different bodies within the city. So the City Plan Commission recommends approval or denial to council, and then zoning goes to council, which then makes the final approval or denial. And so zoning decisions start with a developer. It moves on to staff who helps process that application, and then it goes on to CPC and then council. And so for public input, there's ways to provide that feedback through each of those different processes. And then for variances or special exemptions, the Board of Adjustment approves or denies those. And so we'll pause right here for questions. Brandon or Sandra, do we have any questions so far?
Cornell, Brandon was probably checking in the chat. So I have a question. When is it appropriate for a neighborhood to think about a planned development? When is that appropriate for a neighborhood to consider that as a tool?
I think it's worthy to explore the type of zoning that's already in existence within your neighborhood, and to think about how it works in favor of the vision for your neighborhood and how it doesn't work. A planned development district could be an option, but there could be other ways in which to solve those issues or those concerns. And so I would say it starts with that initial exploration.
We do have a question in the chat. I had an audio problem for a second, but I'm back. Are Euclidean zoning and form-based zoning opposite philosophies, or is form-based zoning more used as a subset of or in tandem with the overall Euclidean zoning method?
So in many of the form-based zoning, particularly within Dallas, because it's such a small geography, it kind of fits within our Euclidean zoning. So there is still somewhat of a separation of uses. Our most intense uses will likely always be excluded from being allowed within a neighborhood. So a landfill is not going to get put into a form-based code, for example. There's specific areas that we put those things. But overall, form-based code is really looking at moving back to a traditional way of development. We had a downtown where many different uses may have existed, but they all kind of fit into the same character, which allowed people to walk back and forth or to take a streetcar or a train. And so that's kind of the purpose of form-based code, is to really support that type of environment.
Okay, and then we've got a few more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Scroll back up here a little bit. What are some options for neighborhoods to combat aggressive zoning requests from developers?
Was that aggressive zoning requests?
Yes, from developers. What can neighborhoods do to combat that?
Well, I would say talk to your plan commissioner and build a relationship with your plan commissioner. Any of these zoning requests will be coming across their desk, and that plan commissioner will be having conversations with those developers. That's a initial step. A next step would be to think about or to start thinking about what the vision for your neighborhood would look like. So that could be as simple as meeting with your neighborhood association and writing out a list of what you would like to see for vacant sites, whether or not a developer is coming forward. Um, Pretty much every neighborhood has some type of lot or property that you know something may happen in the future, but something hasn't happened quite yet, or somebody has come forward, but we don't know what's gonna occur. This is a perfect time to talk about, what you would like to see. So again, that can be as simple as writing a list and a document that communicates the vision of your neighborhood, and it can be as detailed as coming up with a neighborhood plan that can have that's a little bit more in depth and a little bit more complex. But I would say reach out to your city plan commissioner, um, talk to your neighborhood association and your neighbors. And Planning Urban Design is a resource for connecting you to both of those resources.
Another question is there an interactive resource that provides an overview or area map of the zoning repartition of the city?
Yes, yes. So we do have a online map. I'm not sure if we have it within this presentation, but we can make sure that we get that out to anyone. I think if you Google zoning Dallas GIS, it'll be one of the first links that show up, and you'll actually be able to type in your address. I forewarn anyone that's not used to zoning that it is fairly confusing. So I encourage everyone to explore it though. And if you have questions, you can reach out to us or to Sustainable Development and Construction.
Okay, and then also, how are people able to see what zoning requests are upcoming for their neighborhoods?
Yep. So there's also a map that shows zoning requests. We can provide that as a resource as well. And so it will show things that are kind of in the beginning of that process, as well as things that are going up for CPC or for council. So it'll kind of highlight the things that you may need to focus on now versus things that there's a little bit more time.
And I think later in our slides, Cornell, don't we have a way for people to sign up with SDDC so that they get notices of changes that are happening in their neighborhood, correct?
Yes, yes, that's a good point. SDC also has a email list that will notify you of zoning cases across the city, and so that is also another option as well. And I think we maybe one more question, then we can move on to the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, we've got several more questions, actually. Looks like
Mhm.
4 more. Has the city resolved the issues with the permitting process? And if not, what is the time frame?
Hmm. That's a good question, and I'm not the correct person to ask on that, but I will make a note of it so that we are aware in my department, but also so we can get that information back out to you all.
And then, can zoning be used to assist in stopping gentrification?
Uh, that's a very good question, one that we receive quite often. Zoning can certainly be a tool in the fight against displacement, which can be a side effect of gentrification. But there's also other tools that are available through our housing, our economic, and our sustainable development and construction department. In your neighborhood, um, in having those conversations, it's important to build an understanding of those different types of tools and what can be used now, what can be used later, and how we combine them all together to achieve the vision that we want for our neighborhoods.
Then someone was asking if this presentation is available on the zoning's website. I did say earlier we will be presenting a link to a recording of this presentation that will be sent out to all registrants once that link is generated, and I'll be sending that out the next few days. But as far as the website, do you know if there's another place where this is located, or?
It will be posted on our planning and urban design website. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a link to our website as well as our email address if you have additional questions.
Okay. Also, in South Dallas Fair Park, you see the same type of businesses because of parking regulations that won't allow certain types of businesses if the parking lot can't sustain it. But in other areas of town, it seems possible. What is the process to change this?
So the city is actually within a code amendment process for parking, which will have an effect on South Dallas and other neighborhoods like South Dallas. So if you email us, we can provide more information on what those hearings might look like and when they might come up, so that you can participate and see if it's the desired changes that you would like to see within South Dallas.
Someone made a comment that the zoning map does not show active permits, and the active permit map has had issues in its functionality in their experience. And someone else asked how long it takes to switch from agricultural zoning to mixed use and then asked what the details for different types of mixed use zoning tiers are.
So from agricultural to mixed use, it depends on the neighborhood and the context of that. That could be a big shift. Thinking of where the agricultural zoning is typically located within our city, that could be a big shift, but it could also be what's needed and what's desired by development in the area. Thinking of the UNT Dallas area, which is relatively sparsely developed at this point, it's likely that mixed use may go in that area. And as far as different tiers of mixed use, it depends a lot on the context. There can be a small scale mixed use where buildings are maybe only 2 stories and it's a apartment over a retail shop. But also there's different examples if we think of Mockingbird Station or downtown or uptown, where there's many different types of buildings of all sorts of heights and intensity and uses. Of course, that's not appropriate in every part of the city. And so there is some nuance that before the city agrees to make a change of that sort, that the public process is of utmost importance.
So we've got two questions, and then we're caught up. One of them is, where can they find information about the different mixed use zoning tiers? And then also, actually, we just had another question. What is for their neighborhood? Is the other question that came up. And then I have one more after that.
Okay, again, Sustainable Development and Construction is the department that handles our zoning changes. There's actually a chart that includes our standard zoning and what is included in each of those zoning types, which gives a general overview. Again, if you have a question about a specific area or a specific type of zoning, it could be easier to reach out to us so we can point you in the right direction. We know that the online maps as well as our development code can be particularly hard to decipher, and it's easy to get lost within it. And so we're definitely here to help you all with that process and that exploration.
Actually, the last thing in the chat was a comment, not a question, so we're good to go.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll move on to talking about the land development process. Thank you, everybody, for those great questions. So what is land development? Land development is the act of altering the existing condition or use of land through construction activity. So again, here are a few questions to help us all think about land development, what that means within our slice of Dallas and within our life. Is your neighborhood street being improved or changed in some type of way? Is your neighborhood or your neighbor building a new home? Is your neighborhood shopping center being demolished or renovated? These are all types of land development. So demolition, renovation, uh, reconstruction, as well as new construction are all types of land development. But also building a park would be a type of land development as well. And so again, if we're thinking about land use or the different types of ways that we're using land, zoning is the different ways that we regulate what can be on the land and how that land is being used, and land development is how we change those things over time. And so looking a little bit at the land development process. I think the previous slide was fine, Sam. Slide 20. Okay, steps of the development process. So these are the different ways that the city is a part of the development process. I'd like to emphasize that the development process often begins before a developer, before someone doing some type of land development gets to the city. Um, uh, and part of that is designing and finding land, purchasing the land, and getting rights to develop. But once it gets to the city, these are some of the ways that impact the land development process. This includes a zoning change. So this is a zoning change is only required if a developer does not want to follow the existing zoning rules for that particular site. So if it's a residential neighborhood and somebody wants to build a house in that neighborhood, they don't have to go for a zoning change in 99% of the instances. Platting or subdivision, again, this is only required if the developer or construction person doesn't want to change the existing lot configuration. So using our example of a house, if there's a lot that's empty and it's fit for a house and everything is good, that developer doesn't have to come to the city to replat that lot. For a larger lot, maybe where a new shopping center may go or a set of apartments, that may be an example of where a developer will have to come to the city to plat out those lots. For people that live, or for our residents that live at the edges of the city, where there's a lot more undeveloped land, likely developers there will have to come to the city to subdivide those lots to build houses or to build businesses. Permitting is required for all types of building construction and most types of land development. And so regardless of the type of activity that's going on, there's likely a permit and there's regulations that must be followed. So if there's something that's going on in your neighborhood that looks like it may not be happening with the permit, or it's worthy to call the city or to talk to the developer and get more information about what's going on. And then a certificate of occupancy. So this is required for all new buildings once they're complete, before they can be occupied. So for a new business that goes up, an inspector comes out to make sure that regulations are followed before that business can actually be used as a business.
Cornell, there was a glitch.
Mhm.
Would you like us to go to the slide prior? You're
I'm
good?
maybe so. Was it slide 20? Did we skip a slide?
I think so. We had a little glitch. Types of land development.
Okay, well, yes, let's cover this and then we'll go back. So different types of land development. We have private developments. So these are improvements made by private interest on private property. And so we're calling this out separately again because um, before a developer or before a private owner makes it to the city, there's a lot of decisions that go on before it gets to the city. Public improvements, so this would include infrastructure or facility improvements, such as your local library or park and rec center. Um, there's a lot more input from the city, but the residents as well as to how those improvements or how those investments happen. And so a little facts. Yes, not all land development decisions are made by the city. There are many different players within that. And not all land development is controlled by zoning. So there's also fire codes. We have flight paths in the city based on the different airports. There's also environmental regulations that all have an impact on development. And so the city definitely has a large role, but we're not the only player within how development happens within our city. Okay, and so these are some examples of how the city does have a role within development. Our comprehensive land use plan, it sets out a long-term vision for how land use and land development happens within Dallas. And so this plan sets that vision, which it aims to guide our zoning regulations and any changes that might happen, but also how it all fits together. So how do the public and the private investments fit together to make a wonderful city and keep Dallas the wonderful city that it is? Zoning regulations, as we've talked about before, building permits, and so filing those applications and giving permission to build certain things within our city. Code enforcement, which looks at how existing development and businesses and how homes are complying with the rules and regulations of our permits and zoning regulations. And then also development incentive programs. And so you may have heard of tax increment finance districts or TIFs or our public improvement districts across the city. So these are two examples of incentive programs that help to incentivize or encourage development in different parts of the city. The developer's role. So a developer decides what and when to build on a site. The developer must comply with zoning regulations. The developer may apply for zoning changes if necessary. The developer must obtain a building permit, and they must build according to the regulations. Cool. So we'll take another pause here and take any questions on that part of the presentation before we go into neighborhood involvement.
For the steps of the development process, how much are the fees to do each of these?
So the fees are not very straightforward, so I won't try to list them out here. But typically gives an depend on the type of development and the size of the development and what the different types of requests are. So for a home or for a permit to build a new fence or to put in a driveway could be relatively low. However, to build a multi-acre development would require more fees. And so those are things that our permitting office and the Sustainable Development and Construction office would be able to help with if there's a specific request that you have in mind.
And if there happens to be more questions that I didn't get to above that,
Okay.
the link and the PDF that were put in the chat, please retype them. I had a technical issue, and so I am not able to go back further up into the chat. So this is the latest of the questions that I received. So I'm going to give it a minute to see if anyone has any additional ones to type in before we move on. If just give me a minute, see if any folks have to type anything in.
Okay. Moving on, Sandra, would you like to talk about neighborhood involvement?
I sure can. My name is Sandra Bowie, and I am an engagement manager. Oops. With planning and urban design. And one of our key focuses is to build and strengthen neighborhood organizations. So if you need assistance with that, please do not hesitate to contact our office because we believe that the neighborhood organizations is a wonderful way to influence development in your area. We believe that there is power in numbers, and that is what you have when you have many voices coming together with one vision. So get organized with your neighbors. On the Planning and Urban Design website, we have a neighborhood organization map. So if you're not affiliated with a neighborhood organization and want to check to see if there one is in your neighborhood, we encourage you to go to the neighborhood organization map. Carnell has already stated, stay informed about development activity. Get signed up with the Sustainable Development and Construction, being signed up with Planning and Urban Design. You will receive weekly news, a monthly news guide that tells you what's going on with the city. But that database is used by a lot of different departments when development is happening in the area. So we really want you to stay connected. Engage with your developers, invite them to your neighborhood organization meetings and talk about the development that is going on. Provide input on what is satisfactory or unsatisfactory to you. And that goes along with creating that neighborhood vision for what you want to see in your neighborhood as it relates to development. Participate in public hearings, and we will have many opportunities for you later this spring to participate in the Forward Dallas update.
Okay, and I don't see any other questions. I think we're good to go forward.
Okay, very good. And so here is the contact information for Sustainable Development and Construction. They are the current planning division of the city of Dallas. Planning and Urban Design is considered the long-range planning division for the city. And we talked a lot about how you can stay connected with them. Next slide, Sam. Okay. And so we really enjoy the partnership that we have with the library in providing information during the Ask the Expert session. On February 17th, we are hosting Data and Maps to Empower Your Neighborhood. And there were great questions that took place during this conversation. And I think that this is the next step in that you can learn how to access some of the maps tools that we have online to quantify what is happening in your neighborhood. So when you're talking to developers, you can provide that data to back up what you know intuitively about where you live and work. I think that is it.
We have
Yeah,
two
so I think we
last
can take,
questions that popped up there.
Okay, great.
I can
And
yeah,
ask
we
here,
can take more questions.
Okay, thanks.
absolutely, we can. And if you don't have a question, but we're looking to expand this presentation. So if there are more topics that we did not cover in this presentation, please drop them in the chat on topics that you would like us to explore later on. Thank you. And here's our Stay Connected with Planning and Urban Design.
Yeah, so you can also use the email listed on the screen, pud@dallascityhall.com. So if you have additional questions that weren't asked, if you have suggestions or would like to be pointed in the right direction, you can use that email address, and they can forward that to Sandra or to myself or to any of the relevant people within our department or city hall. So just let them
Okay.
know that you were at this presentation.
So the
So
last two questions we have are, for a new development in an older neighborhood, how can you build new without affecting the existing tax base?
Yeah, that's a really great question. That's one that I think continues to be explored by housing advocates within the city. Our appraisal process isn't always very clear on how that process happens, um, but new investment in of public and private has an impact on the value of the neighborhood. And so there are different tools which could be zoning to slow down the increase of that value. But there's also other tools, either for specific property owners to reduce those costs, or from the city to reduce those costs overall for the neighborhood. So unfortunately, there isn't an easy answer to that, um, but it's one that we in planning urban design from a long range perspective are continuing to explore. And I know that many of you and many housing advocates are continuing to explore as well. So please keep asking those questions.
And then someone asked, are developers required to hold community meetings prior to their presenting to CPC?
So no, developers are not required to do so. Some of the planning commissioners will actually set up meetings to encourage those developers to meet with neighborhoods, and particularly in areas where there are strong neighborhood associations and strong involvement from the community. Developers are being made aware that they should speak to the community, because the community is going to know that they didn't come to speak to them first, and will show up to respond. And so as we went through the neighborhood involvement portion, staying informed, knowing how you can participate in the process and how you can organize your neighbors, those are ways to compel and to encourage developers to reach out to you and to your neighbors before they go to CPC, and having a conversation that is collaborative and healthy, versus later on in the process, when it can be a bit more contentious. So CPC and council are the required public hearings by law, but certainly it is in the best interest of everyone for I think for developers to go to the communities in which they develop, and having those conversations.
Okay, another question is, does sustainable development suggest which land bank properties are prioritized to get developed first?
So yeah, the land bank program actually resides within our housing department. So there's actually a policy for how those land bank properties are, how they are sold, and who has access to them. So we can also provide information on how to know where those lots are and whether or not you qualify to develop there. Um, so that's the short answer of that.
Someone suggested, as far as like additional things for future presentations, are how to get developers to meet with your group, like suggestions for contacting them and arranging, to have them meet with you. And then someone asked that you'd mentioned neighborhood plans as a solution to community input and zoning and land use decisions. Hold on, I got to scroll down here.
So,
What is the process for neighborhood plans to be adopted by the city?
yeah, so to the first question about talking to developers, If you see that there's a proposal for or a request for a zoning change, the city has the contact information, is likely in contact with that developer. And so speaking to the city about your desire to meet with that developer is very important. But also the name of the company or the name of the developer would be listed in a public forum. And so you can reach out to that person or that company individually and to request a meeting, let them know that you're part of a neighborhood association or other organization and you would like to have a conversation. And just reaching out and asking politely, I think goes a long way and is a underestimated tactic for getting meetings with developers. What was the second question, Brandon? Sorry.
Question one, that's okay. That you'd mentioned neighborhood plans as a solution to community input and zoning and land use decisions. What is the process for neighborhood plans to be adopted by the city?
So currently the city is focusing on area plans, which are collections of neighborhoods. Our department does have resources to support neighborhoods on developing their own neighborhood plans or developing those neighborhood plans in collaboration with a nonprofit or somebody that's willing to guide them through the process. And the city adopts area plans and citywide plans and currently does not have an adoption process for neighborhood plans. But our department is here to support you to make sure that that neighborhood plan is relevant and addresses the citywide policy and that it's something that is actually usable for your neighborhood and for your neighborhood association. So we can pass along more information about that as well. If you would.
And then we got a comment from someone that said the link on the Sustainable Development Construction homepage seems to be broken. It says for status updates on existing zoning cases, click here, but the link doesn't seem to work.
Okay, we'll look into that as well.
I don't see any other questions in the chat at this time. So I think we're good. But again, if you have any other questions, please reach out to Planning and Urban Design at the email that's in the slide on your screen. And we will be sending out the YouTube link to this video as soon as that is available. It should be in the next few days. So that will be emailed to you, hopefully through the library market system in which you registered for this presentation. Thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.